Welcome to A Pint with Seaniebee. I'm here in my home city of Dublin with a very interesting guest for you all today. He's a very humble and soft-spoken man who doesn't particularly like receiving a lot of praise, although he is deserving of a lot and has received a lot. I'm welcoming to the podcast Kieran McGowan. Welcome, Kieran.
Thanks, Sean.
Kieran is one of the architects of Ireland's transition from a sleepy European agricultural backwater to the sparkly high-tech, albeit still with its problems, country that most people know of it today. He has been for many years involved in what's called the IDA, which is the Industrial Development Authority of Ireland, which was the core body responsible for trying to bring investment and jobs to the country. And he's joining me to reminisce and chat about his life and what he's learned, and we're hopefully going to have a good bit of banter, so welcome.
Thanks very much, Johnny.
So you were born in Dublin and you've lived here all your life.
Have.
And what was it like growing up for you? Tell me a little bit about
Well, it was interesting in this way that I was the eldest of four. We had a shop in Rathmines. My dad was a grocer. He was doing well until he got bad news that he had TB. At that time, TB was rampant, a bit like cancer today. And so he had to go into hospital in the Pigeon House when I was 9, the eldest of four, and I was 9 years old. And so my mother had a big challenge on her hands, rearing the family and also looking after the shop and looking after my father. And
so this was a time before supermarkets.
Long before supermarkets.
What was the shop like? Did you have brown paper bags? It was like the Walton's shop.
Walton's, brown paper bags, machines for cutting the meat, coal in one corner, but selling rubber boots and things, the whole works. The supermarket started to come along, which made life even more challenging for us. But how we survived for a number of years against the supermarkets was we provided a service of delivery. Like a number of our customers who were living beside the shop in Rathmines started to move out, we thought, to the suburbs in Milltown.
About a mile away.
Exactly.
So what year are we talking here?
We're talking here now about early 50s, 53, 54.
Okay.
My father would be going from house to house in Milltown. I was 13 or 14, and that's where I learned to drive in the car when I had to have a cushion. I wasn't supposed to be driving at 13 or 14, but driving around to give a service to the customers and also to provide them with tick, in the books. Credit. And so those two advantages, if you like, over the supermarkets helped us to compete with them for a little while anyway. The shop raised us, basically, And but it taught me also customer service. The people that we were serving, I would know them to this day.
Really?
Yeah, I would, because we got to know their families. So we wouldn't be just delivering their messages. We would be actually going in, having a cup of tea, saying, how's it going?
So it was real customer service.
Real
marketing.
Totally real customer service. And my father, when things were hard up in the customers, he would actually be giving them even more on the books, Then, of course, some of them people didn't ever pay, and that was not easy.
And how was your father?
He was told, again, when I was 9, so that would be 1951, 52, that he'd have a year to live. And he lived for 30 years. Which is
I thought you were going to say
No, it was magic.
I didn't know the answer.
It was magic, really.
So it must have been a wonderful day when he came home.
Yeah, fantastic.
Then you were in school in Sing Street, yeah?
Yeah.
Tell me what that was like back in the day. There was a Christian Brothers school.
It was Christian Brothers school. And it was a brother, O'Keefe was our brother. Right. The oldish man used snuff all down his satan. And he took it on himself to teach us about sex, which was just magic. Like we were.
Well, the priests knew an awful lot more about sex back then than we thought they did.
Yeah. Well, they knew an awful lot more sex than we did because we knew nothing about it. Yeah. And at the end of the first year, he was able to know enough about. There was about 30 or 35 in the class to promote, if you like, 4 of us from D to A, which was a big deal.
Yeah.
We had other.
You were one of them.
I was one of them. Then we had better teachers as we went along.
What are your memories of living in Dublin, like when you're in your late teens?
Well, first of all, my memories in relation to the school was we'd cycle to school, cycle home for our lunch, cycle back in again, and cycle home again. So there was a lot of crack, really, of messing around with the bikes. Yeah.
Did you play sport?
Played Gaelic for the school. In the school also there were forbidden games, one of which was soccer.
Of course.
Yeah, and
so for those overseas listeners, we're talking here about Gaelic football, which is the national sport of Ireland, which has a sister sport called hurling. And in Ireland, they're still the most popular sports by a long stretch in terms of people watching them and playing participation. Although soccer, of course, as in most countries, is played by huge numbers of people. However, soccer was seen by the Gaelic Athletic Association, who runs the GA, as a British sport, and it was banned. And you had to make a call between Gaelic or soccer, and you were kind of shunned a bit as a Brit lover.
You were banned, as you say, by the brothers from playing soccer, but there was an Easter league. So during the Easter holidays, there was a league of soccer teams, and we were Kevins. We played in Dalymount Park, Richmond Park, and really, we thought this was the equivalent of Wembley, so they were terrific days as well. So what was it like that time? Then we started to go to the dances in the Olympic. I met Breda, my wife. Like, I met her first of all in my first job, Irish Pensions Trust, when I was 17. I didn't start going out with her for about a year after that. I really started going out with her because we used to go to the Olympic Ballroom. We used to go to the 4 Provinces in Harcourt Street, the Crystal Ballroom, a lot of dancing.
You met Breda when you were 17, so you've been with Breda for...
So I'm 73 now.
And you have 4 children.
Yes,
right.
And 8 grandchildren.
Emer, Karen, Fiona and Neil.
Very well done.
Did a bit of research.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely you did.
So you whisked her off her feet and you were danced around
Dublin. We danced around.
Did you know
Dublin.
when you met her that you were going to...
I thought she looked fantastic. Marrying her, first of all, my father was very anti the whole thing because I was the eldest. From his point of view, ridiculously young, immature, and tried to talk me out of it.
What age did you marry?
What age when we got married? 22. When he got to know Breda, then he became a huge fan.
Softened him up.
She totally did. She totally did. But it was. I suppose we were young. Like, I mean, if my children started going out when they were 17 and got married when they were 22, I would.
That's what we do. We repeat.
Exactly.
And I know a lot of people who were married, who were married at like 19 and 20, and their kids are getting married at 19 or 20. That's what you do.
I know. Yeah.
So paint the picture now. So you're whisking her off to all these
dance halls.
What was it like in Dublin? So this is the 60s now we're into. So
Yeah.
Beatlemania and stuff was happening.
Absolutely. Show bands.
Right.
Like, for example, Dickie Rock, Joe Dolan, all these guys. They were the hot places to go.
What was it like for a woman living? Were men nicer back then? Were they politer?
Well, I'd say they were for sure. I mean, I'd say that not just Breda and myself, but all of our friends treated women with a lot of respect. We were a group. Breda had a flat. We would go down there with 6 or 8 of us after the dance and have a cup of coffee, have a chat and all that. No messing around, really, by the way. We had a lot in common because we were equal.
But I mean, you were equal. Women weren't. The marriage bar was in place then. They weren't allowed to work.
That's true.
There was a lot of inequality back then.
For example, when I got married, my salary, which was in the 88 at the time, went up from £740 a year to £790 a year just for getting married. Yeah, so, and then Breda had to stop working. They were the rules of things. But I'm just talking about in human relationships. I can't remember any scandals, if you know what I mean, of anybody.
So you then left Sing Street and you went to college. What did you do in college?
I didn't go to college.
You didn't go to college?
Because
Great, neither did I. And that's a big thing that I get on this. People didn't go to college.
No,
right? Okay.
really?
Yeah.
I didn't go to college because after all, like, I was 17, I was the oldest in the family. We hadn't got a lot of money. It would have been out of the question for them to put me through college because I didn't have the money. And it was an accepted thing. It wasn't I was saying, why didn't you send me, blah, blah, blah. So I went and I got my first job, a firm called Irish Pensions Trust. But at that same time, I applied to become part of the government. There's a thing called the executive officer, which was an exam you did at that time if you wanted to get into the civil service. And I was in Irish Pensions Trust for I think it was around about 2 months, and I got a notification that I had been successful in getting the job and I was going to apply to the Department of Industry and Commerce. And I said, I'm going to have to leave.
Well, and we talk about civil service, and Ireland had to almost build a country from scratch in 1996. When we sort of formed the country, we broke away from Britain after many years under their yoke, and we set up the Republic of Ireland. The north of Ireland, for those overseas, is still part of Great Britain. But we had to put in place infrastructure and roads and
Yeah.
departments that looked after education and health, and we had to build a country.
Yeah.
And that wasn't that long
No.
ago when you came along. And
No.
the civil service was seen as it is today, as sort of flabby and bureaucratic and red tape and nothing gets done. And tell me a little bit just about the whole way you view the civil service.
At the time or now?
Now, over your life.
Well, at the time, it was seen to be a good place to go. A lot of the best civil servants, the T.K. Whittakers and these other secretaries of departments, came up through the system because at the time it was a good job to get when you were young. Nowadays, it's different because young people coming out of college have such a choice, and they really would only go into the civil service as a last resort. That's a shame, really.
I think as well that we have, this applies to MPs and Parliament, people in our Parliament. I often talk about Singapore. When I went there, I was amazed. They made politicians the highest paid people in the land. And everyone goes, of course they did, there's a sort of a acerbic reaction. But they did it for a reason. The reason was they wanted to get the brightest people in the country wanting to be going into politics to run the country.
Yeah.
And it worked.
Yeah.
So it was a Lee Kuan Yew thing, starting from scratch.
Yeah.
You can etch a sketch a new country. What's the birthright of the last born? What things would we change here now?
Yeah.
If we could start again, we probably wouldn't have as many TDs.
No, definitely not.
Because there's too many cooks.
But there's another huge weakness in our system, which is that there are some really, really bright people, despite everything, coming up through the civil service, who went to the very top, and they're forced after 7 years to leave. They're like in their middle 40s, and they get a pension for the rest of their lives.
Is that to stop corruption, or what's the reason?
It's to provide for outlets for young people coming up behind them. But to that extent, it's I suppose it's a good thing, but it's just an absolutely crazy thing that the system is. You start paying people a full pension, defined benefit pension, from their middle 40s to the rest of their lives. They could do so much by staying on in the public sector.
What about the frustration of red tape? You can't do that. Work at your own pace. Is that still here?
Well, one of the fantastic things about the IDA is that you didn't have that at all. And the relationship we had with government was that we would get money from the government, and we would deliver jobs, show the government that it was good value for money for them. And the more we did that, the more independence we had, because they said, well, they know what they're doing there in the IDA, and let them at it.
Tell me how the IDA got set up and what the idea was.
So, well, the IDA got set up, I think it got started up in the first place in 1949, just as a way of encouraging people to set up business here. And then in 1969, 1970, they decided to split the IDA off to become its own separate body. Those of us who were working there at the time were given the option of either going back to the civil service or leaving the civil service and going into the new IDA.
Ireland, just for again those people who are listening from overseas, was a agriculturally based poor country. We had a massive famine in the middle 1800s, had huge emigration as part and parcel of this country ever since the dawn of time practically. But there was a sense that we I think initially wanted to try and be competitive with heavy industry.
Well, yeah. See, originally, there was a radical plan produced by Dr. Ken Whittaker called the Program for Economic Expansion, which changed the policy of industry, which the original policy was called the Control of Manufacturers Act. So if someone wanted to set up in Ireland, they had to go and apply for a license. The country was really in a hugely bad way, and he produced this plan to say, forget that, and let's open the doors, and let's welcome in people who want to set up here, and let's give them some incentives to set up here. That was in 1958, I think it was. And that was the beginning of the policy, which in one way or another exists to this day, that we actually build on that to be an open door place where we want to encourage overseas companies to come and set up in Ireland and to provide jobs and to help them out. So the changeover was a fantastic thing to do.
They pushed a lot into education as well. They believed that if we were emigrating, let's be smart.
Strong emphasis on education. Yeah,
which still stands
in the hope it does. And in the early days, the first pharmaceutical company that came here was Pfizer in around about the early 60s. It took off from there, really.
They're still here, aren't they?
They're still here.
Where was your head at then in terms of, you were just saying that you had the choice to make of probably a braver but maybe a little bit riskier move into the new IDA or stay as a civil servant. Were you starting to feel a kind of a calling?
Yeah, well, the work I was doing was in the IDA, but it was part of the civil service, and Breda was all out for it as well. So I thought it was a good decision to go with the new IDA. It was an exciting place to be. You can just imagine yourself, like you're talking to big businessmen who were talking about coming here. You know, your mindset was to be encouraging to them, going back to the customer service thing I was talking about in the shop, and that you were given tools, which is grants. In other words, you're writing up applications for them to get money from us. It was terrific work, really, you know, and you felt good about it. And then in the early days too, we built a number of industrial estates, and one in Waterford, one in Galway, so we'd actually be able to say to an incoming investor, and we have factories there waiting for you to have a look at and see if they've suited you and so on.
So you built actual factories
in advance
yeah. That were all ready to.
How
did you know what kind of factory to build?
We didn't.
Right.
We didn't.
So just a big warehouse kind of thing.
Yeah, we built an estate first of all, and
right.
they were so there would be some factories, let's say, of 10,000 square feet, and some of 20,000 square feet, and then if it didn't entirely suit them, they could expand. We always room for expansion and so on.
I can imagine the discussions about freeing that money up. So
yeah.
What are you doing here? What if no one comes?
Yeah.
It's like build it and they will come.
Yeah. Well, it's like we had to say to the government, you trust us, you know. I mean, and from the word go, like that's a challenge, and it has worked really, really well. There was never any.
There's also an element of, I suppose, it is a major public works exercise, so you are putting people to work.
Yes.
On building
true.
these things.
That's true as well.
So that also helps.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah. So I guess we move on now. I guess is the next stage the big Intel win.
No, I was just going to mention about the startup of the IFSC because it was a few years before
was
Intel.
It really?
Yeah,
oh,
it
okay.
was 1987
right.
and Intel was 1989. So no way. 1987, then there was new government appointed. It was an election, new government, new Taoiseach Charlie Haughey. High emigration, high unemployment. They looked around to see what could they do about it.
We had this guy, Charles Haughey, who took over Ireland. He became our Taoiseach, our Prime Minister. Very polarising person. To my mind, and I'm a generation or two behind Kieran, I found him an odious and corrupt man. He was one of those sort of guys who used to stand and sit on the television telling everyone to tighten their belts, and it all came out that he was spending like a lord. But he was the guy at the start of this attempt to bring Ireland kicking and screaming into a new era, which I guess eventually happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the you will come to maybe Bertie Ahern, who was one of his successors, and there was a great quote about the subsequent boom in Ireland, which was Bertie Ahern taking credit for. It was like a cock taking credit for the dawn, which I quite liked.
Very good, very good.
What was your view of Haughey? You don't have to say anything that you.
So I could tell you stories because I had a fair bit of dealings with them. And certainly the IFSC...
How did he treat you?
I'll tell you a little story. He phoned me up in 1989 and he asked me to go over and see him. I was at the second level in the IDA. And he said, your minister, who at the time was Des O'Malley, and the Minister for Finance, who at the time was Albert Reynolds, are at loggerheads with each other. And I've been acting as an honest broker between them. He said, and we had a meeting this morning and all we could agree was that we would get someone independent to meet the two of them. And what the issue was about a German company, Willie Corf, buying Irish Steel. Irish Steel was a basket case. He said, so all we could agree on was we get someone, and there's someone as you to see to me, and we want you to go and meet Albert Reynolds and meet Des O'Malley.
These are all Irish
ministers, yeah. And come back here and tell me two things. One is, what do you think of Corf and what do you think of the deal? And I did a lot of research, as you might imagine, because he was the Taoiseach. And I came back after about a fortnight to see him, and he said, well, yes or no, Sissy. And I said, well, it's a little bit more complicated than yes or no, Taoiseach. And I told him the pluses and minuses. He sat me down, he said, and he questioned me, and the questions were on the button.
Was he respectful to you?
Totally. And so much so after that, like, I had a good enough relationship with him. You know?
But tell me about some of his
the
bad side.
Bad side. He's
dead now, so I'm
dead
sure
now.
There's a statute of limitations in this.
Yeah. On another occasion, he called me over and he said, I've met a group of people this morning, he said, who are among the brightest people I've ever met in my life. They want to invest in Ireland, and I'd like you to look after them personally, to see. And I said, so what sector are they talking about? And he said, I don't know, food maybe, to see. So they were Arabs. Met them and had a lot of toing and froing with them. But they really had never any interest because they were already after parting with a lot of money to Yemen. That's what he was. He was a mix of, but he did change, like up until then, every Taoiseach was straight as a die. So it's
he got found out, I think it's fair to say, and he did have to face the music before he died. I think he died caught.
Yeah.
He died caught.
Well, I think most people who would be around would say that there was some mixture of both of those things in it. Yeah. Certainly, the IFSC probably wouldn't have happened only for him because he was so driven and so powerful, really.
Well, and they get a huge amount of him wanting it to succeed would be to deliver on his own ego, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah. But also by overriding, I mean, so if the fellow from the revenue, for example, the Department of Finance said, well, this is Taoiseach, so he'd actually drive through them.
So the IFSC is a glittering...
Yeah, so it employs about 40,000 people now, So
it's been a very successful undertaking over the last 40 years where we've moved from trying and failing to compete with heavy industries. We did have some success. Henry Ford, for example, built his first factory in Europe, in Cork. But we were never really able to compete, as Kieran said, with steel or heavy-duty shipbuilding or stuff like that was going on, mainly in Britain. We were a country that was agricultural. So today we have a very different setup. Talk to us about where the last 30 years of the IDA brought the country, or helped to bring the country.
One of the companies that came here, as you mentioned, was Intel, and they put together a team that was going to visit 7 countries, including Ireland. In the early stages of their assessment here, they were very taken with talent. They were worried about where would they be able to get people who had experience of semiconductor manufacturing, because we had no other high volume semiconductor operation in Ireland. They were going to be the first, and they wondered how could they manage that. We hired a consultant to go out to California to actually go around. There was a network of Irish kids who had gone to work in California. We plugged into that network and went to them and said, if there was a job available for you in Ireland, would you come back? And we got 64 or 65 names of people and addresses and phone numbers to say, yeah, if Intel come, we definitely would go back. So that was very helpful. We were giving Intel a big grant. In fact, the Intel grant was 87 million. Over 5 years, and to put it in context, the total budget of the IDA at the time was actually 75 million.
Right.
So
big punt.
And the government said, well, look, this is a big punt, and it's a big firm, we know that, and we know they're going to provide 1,300 jobs, I think it was at the beginning. But you're going to have to get strong commitment from Intel that they're going to be here for at least 5 years. Right. Intel said to us, we don't know. We can count for the first 18 months, but after that, it depends as much on you, Ireland, as it does on us. So if you can continue to have a competitive environment for us to be here, we're all on the same side.
Most companies would say that.
They would say it, and in fact they meant it, because it's a very fast-moving sector, as you know. Yeah. Anyway, it's got set up, and it's been a huge success. Like, I mean,
they're still here. You brought that over the line in what year?
September 1989.
1989. So this for you was a big...
Well, it was transformative. I mean, it was like going from Doncaster Rovers to Manchester United, really, in terms of how we presented to other firms around the world. And they told us as well that if we come to Ireland and we continue here, there will be construction companies and other contractors on the site, suppliers, that will never leave the site. And that is proven from 1989 to 2017 to be the case. Which
Intel
is remarkable.
Intel
inside.
That's their line.
So they employ about 4,500 or 5,000 people now.
So the basic pitch, and let's talk in a second about some of the. You didn't win everything.
No,
right?
no, and we put a lot of effort into things that we didn't win. Like, for example, at the same time, there was obviously huge growth in the sector, and Siemens were looking at building a new wafer fabrication operation as well. We said we should go to Intel and ask them for their permission, because at this stage Intel was by far our biggest client, still is to this day, and said, like, would you be okay with us going after Siemens? And they said, we would, provided you put them in Cork rather than Dublin, because we don't want them to be poaching our workers. Fair point, I thought. Siemens also had a team that we were interacting with, and they were happy about going to Cork. There was no issue about that. In fact, there was no issue about anything, really, we thought, because we had now established ourselves through the Intel decision. We went to our board and to say that we had this proposition from Siemens, which we've developed over the last few months, and we were recommending a package and so on, and our board agreed to it. We thought we were home and dry, and then the next thing we got, there was no sound at all from Siemens, and when we were trying to find out what was going on, it went quiet. And John Bruton was the Taoiseach at the time. We asked John Bruton would he ring Mr. von Pierer, who's the chief executive of Siemens, who subsequently got into a lot of bother, but with
South Africa,
was it, or China somewhere? Yeah. He rang von Pierer and he got back onto me. Bruton did, and he told me that when their team went to their own board, the board had turned it down because between times the government of Britain offered to buy all of their army of vehicles, all of their every other kind of vehicles from Siemens for the next 5 years. So the thing went to Newcastle instead of to Cork. Huge disappointment to us.
Well, Siemens, if you're listening, you haven't had such a good run over the last 10 years. Maybe you should have come to Ireland.
Actually, they closed. The Newcastle operation had to close down afterwards, which was lucky in a way for us.
Your key pitch was a low tax economy and a well-educated young workforce.
Yeah.
Would that be fair?
Would.
Were you in bed and tight with the education changes that needed to take place to meet?
Yeah, we were.
How did you do that?
Because of the nature of the organisation and its relationship with government, we had a big say-so about how money got spent in the rest of the economy. So if the IDA felt that it was really important, let's say, to have an Institute of Technology, which happened in relation to Intel and Blanchardstown, we really need to set up another college nearby, that would happen. So the reach of the IDA, I'd say to this day, is very much beyond the narrow business of the tax, you know. Yeah.
How did you approach these problems that had so many different legs to them that needed fixing? Did you chunk them and just do it one by one, or did you?
Well,
did you get frustrated?
With Intel. Not really. No, not really. I didn't get frustrated. And if go back to Intel, we got really close to them, you know. And funny and a nice thing happened. Rolled forward to last year. The head of Intel worldwide, his name is Craig Barrett. He was in the situ when the decision got made to come here, and he's still around. He was retired now, but I rang him. I wanted him to come to a meeting and talk about it all. I rang him, and then I said, "I don't know if you remember me, Craig. I'm Kieran McGowan and he said, "Remember you?" He said, "Everyone in Intel." I thought that was very nice, really.
It's very good.
Yeah,
I know.
Yeah.
Well, I said at the top of the podcast that you're not comfortable with receiving praise. Why is that?
Well, I don't feel any need for it, to be honest with you, genuinely.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about my own kind of history in here, but like there was a whole big organisation with me as well. You know what I mean? So I wasn't doing it on my own.
No, but you were leading it. I mean,
I was leading it.
You were the captain. You were the leader. You were the public face.
Yeah. But you know, it's embarrassing, really. I mean, it's embarrassing.
Right. Bertie Ahern called you a practical patriot.
Did he? Yeah. He said something nice about me when I was retiring. All right, which was nice.
Bertie Ahern was another Taoiseach of Ireland, Prime Minister, who came in after Haughey. He was very much a student or acolyte of Charlie Haughey, and he also ran into problems, although he did a lot of good work for Northern Ireland, fixed that, and he was in charge when basically the next thing I want to talk about is the boom. So Ireland then went from being this really poor fag-end country in the EEC, taking huge grants from Europe. Kieran has spoken about the IFSC. We set up a financial services sector in the country. It took off, and happy days came. Ireland in the late 90s, early 2000s was booming. We went from one of the poorest countries in Europe to one of the wealthiest. So everyone here was buying houses in Poland and Lithuania and Mercedes-Benz, and banks were giving 120% loans out to people, and we could do no wrong. Yeah. You retired in 1998 just as this boom hit from the IDA.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that time.
Well, it was the boom, as you say. You described it well. I don't. I mean, there's something I think in our general psyche that we don't seem to be able to do steady state growth. We either do what you're after describe it, or we go bust.
We're boom or bust.
Boom or bust. I think it's driven by. We're still a relatively young country. You know what I mean? So we don't have a capitalist sector really. We have a small number of very wealthy people. When you compare it to the UK, for example, it's completely different. Like our background is we came, as you said, from an agriculture country. So we are still growing really in terms of putting in place a capitalist system. They and the developers and the bankers had drove a lot of the mad stuff. People were climbing over each other. A lot of people then got hurt when it went bang. It has been awful as well, you know.
So the country went into massive overdrive, could do no wrong, and then around about the time of the subprime collapse, and before that here probably, we had a housing bubble caused by overeager banking, loans going out to people. Somebody said to me once that actually the growth of the IFSC brought a whole pile of very, very rich, well-salaried people from overseas banks into Dublin, for example, who were able to name their price on accommodation and bought whatever they wanted and probably wanted to stay in the city centre, and almost that 2,000 people or whatever it was fueled the whole bust.
And that's true, and that's happening right as this moment
right now,
because driven by Brexit, where a number of these hotshots are coming in, pushing up the price at the top end of the market to this day. It's extraordinary that we don't seem to be able to manage it.
Well, I mean, I left away and I left to leave Ireland in 1996, and my joke is, as soon as the plane door closed, Ireland started making lots of money out of that. This is why it was the catalyst. But I used to come home, you know, obviously for Christmas and stuff like that, and it became to the point where I just didn't like coming home. I didn't like the attitude of people. I didn't like the fact that... So during this bust, we still... just to show that, you know, this whole trickle-down economics doesn't work. What happened was inequality went through the roof. We left a lot of people behind, and we still have that as an aftermath to this day. Did you see the bus coming? You were in a, maybe, I don't know whether you want to talk about this, but you when you left the IDA, you were very in demand to sit on boards of major corporations, because I guess you had contacts there and they were saying, this guy's really good, bring him in. How did your life change when you retired?
Well, it changed good. I retired from the IDA when I was 55. The first company that I asked me to go to join their board was CRH.
That's Cements Roadstone Holdings. They're a big construction company.
I subsequently became chairman of that company. So I was at a different track, I suppose, really.
Very successful company.
Very successful company, exactly. They employ about 300,000 people. It's very big. The company said, well, if CRH want them, we want them as well. So I got on the board of a number of different companies. I had to learn new skills, really, because the public sector and the private sector, they're really, really very different from each other.
So one of the things that happens and has happened is, you know, we opened the discussion talking about your job in a grocery shop in Rathmines.
Yeah.
And banks used to be not unlike that.
Yeah.
Where you knew the local manager, where you put your money and you trusted them, and he took a little bit off the top and he helped you.
Exactly.
And banks have become these horrible supermarket type places where they don't treat, we talked about real customer service. Your brown paper bags, giving credit, tick boxing, your father doing this. Banks don't do. We're in the process as we speak of a major scandal about to erupt in Irish banking over again housing and mortgages. You were caught in the eye of a storm. You were a board director of Irish Life Permanent when 100% loan to value mortgages came in, where I think Ulster Bank started it, and all the banks then started giving people too much bloody money.
That's exactly correct. And the chief executive of Irish Life Permanent at that time was a guy called David Went. He went to the regulator and he said, look, you better step in here and ban 100% mortgages, because if you don't, it's going to be widespread. And
so this would be the central bank.
It's a branch of the central bank.
Branch of the central.
And David was a banker for a long time, and he's also very clear in his views. And he said, if you don't step in and ban these 100% mortgages, you're going to lead to widespread inflation. And the regulator said, well, we're a principle-based regulator, which is just nonsense, really. It's just words. So anyway, it happened, and I was fortunate in a way. Like, I was on the board 9 or 10 years, but I retired in 2008. So I missed the worst of it in terms of the banks being called to account, which they should have been.
So let's stop there. So
yes, so
should have been prosecuted. Nobody's been prosecuted. One of the things I am interested in is, you talk about David Wendt, you talk about your role, we talk about the banks as if there's some sort of amorphous kind of cloud of people. All of the people who are in the banks are people who get up in the morning, go to work, and come home. David Wendt, you said, warned the regulator, if we continue to do this, we were going to drive inflation and possibly a bubble. But he went and did it because from what I've read, they're very sensitive to market share, and they want to keep their market share up. What we're talking about here is a cartel that seems to just do what it likes and waits for a teacher to say, don't do that, knowing full well that we're being driven down.
Also, so if you take a bank, any bank, they have a number of stakeholders, one of whom are actual shareholders in the bank. They come along in relation to the current issue of stealing money, you could say, away from the people who have tracker mortgages. I'd say what happened, and just goes to people's values, there must have been a discussion at the board of some bank to say, look, we, the board, would like you to woo people, customers of ours, away from their tracker mortgages, because otherwise we're going to have less profits. So that discussion in one form or another must have happened at one bank, and then nobody asked the question of, what about the customers we have who have tracker mortgages, who are finding it hard enough to pay even the tracker mortgages?
But I will contend that someone did ask that question, because that's a very obvious question.
You would think.
Well, no, I would say the question was asked, and there was a decision made. Screw them.
That wouldn't be put on the table. Screw them.
No, of course not. In any correspondence.
The profit motive was really the driver. Of course, now when it's seen, it seemed to be just appalling.
Well, I have a friend who was fairly high up in the legal department of the central bank. When the first collapse happened, and when the first collapse happened, just for those listening, Ireland went from boom to bust. It nearly did a Greece. The only reason we didn't do a Greece is that we had probably better infrastructure in terms of taxation and stuff like that. People do pay their taxes here, but it was the taxpayer who got left with the bill for all of these guys who were trading fraudulently and abusing the system. I had a friend of mine in the central bank, and I said to him, what the hell just happened? Why didn't you say anything? And he said, nobody asked me. And I went, that's not good enough.
You have to be asked.
Well, we're not a whistleblower nation. We're not someone who encourages whistleblowing. We're not
and whistleblowers don't get well treated.
And they don't get well treated at all, as we know from around the world. And this is the regulator. This is the guy who's the canary in the mine, who's got and he's got a wife, and his view is, I see the crash coming. I think a lot of people saw the crash coming. People in the building trade saw the crash coming. My sister is an architect. But everyone just froze in the headlights, waited for the lorry to hit them. And again, to your point, we don't seem to have learned and put in place checks and balances to stop this happening again. We're in the throes of Brexit, where we're hoping the IDA, which is still going, is hoping, I'm sure, to get a lot of businesses coming in here because we're English speaking and we're close to America and all this kind of stuff. If we do get them, they're going to come in. If there's not enough houses, they'll have free reign on buying whatever they want. That'll drive the property up again. People will get squeezed out. Eventually there'll be a bubble and we'll collapse again. Why do you not think that we've been, because we're educated?
I think it's kind of, we're a nation of followers, especially on this point we're talking about, rather than outright leaders who are prepared to go against the trend and say, well, look, these people are going to drive up the prices. We're going to stay out of it. And then if their shareholders are saying, well, look, and why is the share price? We say, well, look, that's the way we want to run our business. That's going to take someone with a lot of balls, really, to do that. And a lot of balls and a lot of support from other places, other people and other stakeholders. That has been the dominant culture over time. followers.
The other thing I wanted to talk to you about was I've come home to Ireland, and I was intrigued about your very clever strategy of getting people back to serve the Intel pitch. I've come home after 21 years and I'm kind of angry. I'm angry because 21 years is a long time in politics.
Long time in life.
And a long time in life and a long time in businesses. And if you take, from when you retired in 1998, you go back 21 years to the mid-60s and the leaps and bounds that we made between 1965 and 1998. And I look now at the country that I left in 96, 21 years ago. And the same 5 things that were problems then are the same 5 things, only worse now. Our health system is creaking, was creaking back then, is worse. Hospital bed waits to see GPs, waits to see doctors. Our education system has been in need of overhaul during that time, I think.
It is in need of overhaul, especially at third level.
We have a growing and worsening inequality, despite what anyone tells us about our progressive tax system. We have got lots and lots and lots of people who can't make ends meet. Mm-hmm. We have a homeless problem that is laughable. We have something like 9,000 people in this country in temporary accommodation, 2,500 in kids. We only have 200 people on the streets of Dublin sleeping rough. I say that only because we can't even fix that. And we have a body politic, or a parliament, a Dáil, that is full of people who procrastinate and don't do. And we have no doers. We are missing creativity, we are missing bravery, and we are missing action. And these were the things that we were missing in 1996 when I left. One of the reasons I left. You're a glass half full guy. Tell me how we can get out of this. How do you think we can get out of this?
Well, if you take the homelessness, for example, there are 1 or 2 people breaking the mould. Mm-hmm. Peter McVerry, Brother Kevin.
Mm-hmm. Which I would say Tony Gregory was doing in 1996 when I was leaving. Yeah. There were people there then who were breaking the mould.
Yeah. I guess what we need are people, more breakers of moulds, really.
I think another thing is compassion. We've lost something.
See, I think we're compassionate as a nation on an individual basis.
Right.
I even feel that about myself, for example. We have a number of people who, are having a hard time. I feel very close to them. I really feel very close to them, and I think that would be the case with a lot of people. Much more than we're able to be compassionate to a plan. I was saying to the fellas that do the Vincent de Paul out our own way, like, would it be possible, I said to them a few years ago, to break off, say, a series of half a dozen, and a half a dozen, and a half a dozen, and say, Sean, we would really like you to look after
these 6 people.
Whatever. Because I think instinctively in our nature, I think we're not. It's not as if we're absolutely completely driven mad by wealth and all that. I think that we are a compassionate people. We've never been able to harness a response to it. Of course, that didn't happen either. In relation to guys who said, well, we couldn't do that because it would break down and all the rest of it. And I think that's a bit of a pity, really,
From when we were children, we have this built-in, despite the fact that we're Catholic and Christian, and so much of religion is about looking after the person in trouble.
Yeah.
We have this built-in resistance to giving alms and excuses. Yeah. Those women are only out there with their single mothers. They're only having babies so they can get the free money. Now, the free money is 100 and something a week. I know. There's a lot better ways of making $100 than getting pregnant and having a baby. Your man's only going to spend his money on drugs. So what?
Doesn't matter, exactly.
Doesn't matter.
Exactly.
And I don't know how we break this.
We have it in us. Yeah. And I think in this respect, yourself and myself will come from the same. You knew before we had this interview where my background was decidedly modest. I think that's my dominant culture. I really get good satisfaction out of it. And as time has gone on, by the way, in relation to my own kind of career, I now have about 4 or 5 involvements, and only one of them is commercial involvement. All the rest of them are pro bono in one way or another. So, and that's the way it should be, I think, really.
Yeah.
And I get much more kick out of it than I did out of the businessy things, Yeah.
I look at, say, my career in advertising, and it's very easy to say this from a 30-year career where I've made my money.
Yeah.
But I find it not unlike the cigarette business. It's a business that is morally and ethically questionable. It is a business that drives greed. It is a business that pimps capitalism. It is a business that makes people buy and want things they don't necessarily need, which causes them to get into a hole.
Yeah.
Which we seem to just go, sorry, you didn't have to buy, you didn't have to believe our ads. There's something to me about trying to get... Like, I really like the way that you chunk the Vincent de Paul thing.
Yeah.
To me, that chunking idea is an example of creativity. It's doing something differently to solve a problem, looking at problems in new ways.
Yeah.
It's brave, might not work,
Yeah.
but let's have a crack at it.
Yeah.
It is action, and it is actionable.
Yeah.
You're working at the moment with business in the community.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
So business in the community have a number of member companies who give them money to do things. And for example, one of which is, it's called a Schools Business Partnership Program, where they would go to, let's say, Diageo. They'd ask Diageo to mentor kids from James's Street School, kids who have no parents anymore, typically break out of school at their interstage. They would get people in Guinnesses to mentor the kids. The track record is that the probability of going on to the Leaving Cert stage is way, way higher than it would have been without this program. And then the mentors very often become friends of the kids for life. We have that going with 249 schools around the country.
Right.
Number one. Number two, we have another program called Ready for Work, where we get people who have been in a bad place, druggies, have been in prison mostly, and who are getting their act together, and they're made ready for work, certified in a way. We would go to a member company, the best of whom is Marks and Spencer, and say, listen, we think that Shawnee now is okay.
Give them a job.
Give him a job. They would take him on, they'd give him a job for a fortnight, they'd give him a little certificate saying Shawnee, or alternatively, if
take him on
3 months, they have little videos, and it's just really emotional how these kids saying, they're now working in the luggage department, or they're now actually being allowed to serve customers, and they never thought they would be.
So who's
fantastic.
Is it a new thing?
It's there since the year 2000.
Okay.
And I've been chairman of it since 13 years.
Well, I'd like to help with that.
Would you?
Can. Yeah, in any way.
They also give advice to companies about their sustainability of their businesses, climate action and all that kind of stuff. It's actually, I'd say, very dead on for you and what you're trying to think about.
One of the things you just touched on there I want to talk to you about. Why have we not become one of the global leaders in sustainable energy? Wind, wave.
Yeah.
We're a rock in the middle of the roughest ocean in the world.
Yeah.
Why can't we harness? Why have we not bothered? Yeah. Denmark have.
We should have. Like the reality is we should have. But we're a ridiculous country in the sense that if you want to put up a farm of the
wind farm,
someone will object to it. Crap, really.
Okay, look, that was really intriguing and interesting, and you've calmed me down a little bit, I think, my return to my home country. So look, before we wrap this up, and thank you so much for giving me your time.
Thank you.
What are your 2 or 3 things you want to leave wisdom-wise? And what would you say to a young person in Dublin today or Ireland today?
So strong emphasis on education.
Keep learning.
Keep learning. Another thing that I think really people need to trust people in businesses and in life. Know the person that that you might be talking to or working with, such that they're a real friend or a business friend, but they're somebody that you could actually criticize them, but they would take it in a way that it would be their brother. Meaningful. Trust, I think, is a huge thing, really. And then the whole business about, I'm thinking of a number of the people that I know at the other end of life, and I do put my arms around them, give them a hug, really, Yeah.
So compassion.
Yeah, the lady who delivers our newspaper, for example, is a really good friend of Breeders and myself. She gets a terrible raw deal from her in every way. We love her, really.
Yeah.
And she says this, we're in lieu of her parents, really.
Wow.
I'd like to be able to do that for more people.
Brilliant. Yeah. Kieran McGowan, thank you very much for taking time to chat on a pint with Seaniebee. Some really interesting leave-behinds there, and also I think you're the first person who's mentioned trust out of all my interviews, and I think it's something that's been lacking in my career and is lacking in society in general. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.